All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
You guys have given us a fascinating challenge today,
Yeah.
diving into the Sermon on the Mount from the Gospel of Matthew,
Hmm.
but with a twist. We're looking to connect these ancient teachings
With modern concepts
Yeah.
and see how they apply to personal development. And
navigating today's world.
the Sermon on the Mount is considered one of the most important ethical and spiritual teachings in history.
But sometimes the language can feel a bit distant. So
Yeah,
let's see if we can bridge that gap.
Exactly. We're going to explore ideas
Mm-hmm.
like fire of hell representing being stuck in low consciousness,
Adultery in the heart as thoughts misaligned with actions.
and even giving your shirt as a metaphor for letting go of material possessions.
Sounds good.
So where do we even begin with a task like this?
Well, the Sermon on the Mount is essentially a blueprint for living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
It offers a set of principles and practices that can guide us towards greater wisdom, compassion, and inner peace.
Right. And you mentioned that one of the key challenges is the language barrier.
So let's try to break that down a bit.
Right.
For instance, you suggested we look at the Beatitudes, those famous blessings,
From the beginning of the sermon and see how they might resonate.
with modern life.
Exactly. The Beatitudes might seem like archaic pronouncements at first glance.
But they actually contain some profound psychological insights.
Okay, so let's take a look at a specific example. How about, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth."
In today's competitive world, being meek almost seems like a disadvantage.
Right, it can feel that way. But what if we reframe meekness as inner strength and resilience?
In a world that's constantly trying to pull us in different directions, being meek could mean having the strength to stay grounded
To hold on to your values.
and not get swept away by external pressures.
That kind of resilience is invaluable in modern life.
So it's less about being passive or submissive
Yeah.
and more about having that unshakable inner core.
That ability to weather the storms of life without losing yourself.
Right.
I like that. And what about, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God"?
Is this meant to be taken literally, or is there a deeper meaning there?
I think it points to a state of clarity and authenticity, a mind that is free from the distractions of ego-driven desires and the cloudiness of negative emotions.
It suggests that when our hearts are pure, when our intentions are aligned with our actions, we experience a deeper connection with ourselves, with others, and with the world around us.
So it's about aligning your thoughts, words, and actions, living in a way that feels true and authentic to who you are.
That resonates a lot with the idea of personal development.
Absolutely. The Sermon on the Mount is essentially a guidebook for aligning ourselves with our highest potential.
For cultivating the qualities that lead to a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
And a big part of that is moving beyond superficial interpretations and diving deeper into the symbolic and metaphorical layers of the text.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those deeper layers, shall we?
You suggested we take a look at some of the more challenging passages.
And then the sermon. And see if we can reframe them using modern concepts
For example, you said fire of hell could be interpreted
as being stuck in a state of low consciousness.
What did you mean by that?
Well, think about the imagery of hellfire. It's often described as a place of eternal torment.
Of suffering and anguish.
And while there are certainly literal interpretations of this concept, what if we consider the psychological dimension?
What if hellfire represents the mental and emotional torment that we inflict on ourselves?
When we get stuck in negative thought patterns.
When we're consumed by fear, guilt, or shame.
So it's less about a physical place and more about a state of mind.
A kind of internal prison that we create for ourselves.
Exactly.
And getting out of that prison requires a shift in consciousness, a willingness to let go of those negative thought patterns.
And cultivate a more positive and expansive outlook.
And that's where personal development comes in.
It's about recognizing the power of our own minds to shape our reality and choosing to create a more empowering and fulfilling inner landscape.
I love that interpretation. And what about adultery in the heart?
What's the modern equivalent of that?
I think it relates to that feeling of dissonance we experience when our thoughts and actions are misaligned, when we're not living in accordance with our values.
It's like when we say one thing but do another.
Or when we hold beliefs that contradict our behavior.
That inner conflict can create a lot of mental and emotional anguish.
So it's not so much about physical infidelity, but about being true to yourself.
It's about living in alignment with your core values and beliefs.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that inner integrity, that sense of wholeness and authenticity that comes from aligning our thoughts, words, and actions.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about bridging the gap between who we are on the inside and how we show up in the world.
So let's talk about putting these ideas into practice. What does it really mean to turn the other cheek in a modern context?
Does that mean letting people walk all over you?
Because that doesn't sound very empowering.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think turning the other cheek is less about passivity and more about choosing non-reaction.
About not getting swept up in the cycle of negativity and aggression.
So it's more about taking a step back, a pause, before reacting.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that reacting defensively often just escalates the situation and creates more conflict.
Turning the other cheek is about interrupting that cycle, about choosing a more mindful and compassionate response.
It's about recognizing that you have a choice in how you respond to situations.
That's a really powerful concept. And what about giving your shirt into your coat?
That seems a bit extreme.
That's right. But I think the deeper message here is about detachment from material possessions.
It's not about literally giving away all your belongings, but about recognizing that true security and happiness don't come from what we own.
It's about shifting your focus from external validation to internal fulfillment.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true wealth lies in our relationships, our experiences, our inner peace, and our connection to something greater than ourselves.
And speaking of connecting to something greater than ourselves, you mentioned that the phrase, "your kingdom come," could be interpreted as a call to cultivate higher consciousness.
What did you mean by that?
Well, the traditional interpretation of your kingdom come is often seen as a prayer for God's will to be done on earth.
But what if we consider the idea that the kingdom of God is within us?
That our own inner world
Our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs.
create our reality.
Exactly. So your kingdom come could be seen as a call to cultivate that inner kingdom, to create a state of inner peace, harmony, and alignment with our highest potential.
That's powerful. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from within.
Not from external circumstances or possessions.
Precisely. And it's a journey, not a destination. It's about continuously striving to become more conscious, more aware, and more aligned with our true nature.
You know, it's fascinating how the Sermon on the Mount takes these seemingly simple concepts and weaves them into such a profound tapestry of wisdom.
It's like each thread
Yeah.
represents a different aspect of human experience.
Yeah.
And when you pull on one, you realize it's connected to everything else.
It's true. It's like this intricate web of interconnected ideas that all point toward the same ultimate goal.
Living a more conscious, compassionate, and fulfilling life.
Exactly. And one of the threads that really stands out to me is this idea of letting go of attachment.
We've talked about it in relation to material possessions,
Right.
with giving your shirt,
Right, yeah.
but it also shows up in other teachings, like swear not at all.
You suggested this could be interpreted as avoiding unrealistic fixed promises.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in today's world, we're constantly bombarded with messages that encourage us to strive for certainty, to control the future, to make promises that guarantee a specific outcome.
But life is inherently unpredictable.
Things change.
Yeah.
Circumstances shift.
And clinging to those rigid promises, those fixed expectations, can create a lot of suffering when things inevitably don't go according to plan.
It's like trying to hold on to water. The tighter you grasp, the more it slips through your fingers.
Exactly. And so, swear not at all could be seen as an invitation to embrace the uncertainty of life.
To be present with what is, and to hold our plans and expectations lightly.
It's about cultivating that flexibility and adaptability, that ability to flow with the current of life,
Yeah.
rather than trying to dam it up.
And speaking of letting go of attachment, you mentioned that the concept of giving could be seen as an ego-driven action.
That might seem counterintuitive at first.
Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. I think a lot of times when we give, whether it's our time, money, or energy.
There's a part of us that expects something in return.
Right.
Maybe it's recognition or praise for our generosity, or maybe it's a sense of moral superiority.
Or even a subconscious expectation of reciprocity.
But that kind of giving with strings attached, ultimately reinforces the ego's sense of separation,
Because it creates a dynamic of giver and receiver.
rather than recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings.
Exactly. And so true giving, as described in the Sermon on the Mount, might be about letting go of those expectations.
About giving freely and unconditionally. simply because we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of all beings.
It's about acting from a place of love and compassion, without any attachment to the outcome or any need for recognition.
And it's fascinating how this concept of selfless giving ties back to the idea of your kingdom come as a representation of higher consciousness.
Right, because if higher consciousness is about transcending the ego's limitations
Yeah.
and recognizing our interconnectedness with all things,
Then giving without expectation of reward or recognition perfectly aligns with that,
it becomes an act of recognizing the unity of all beings.
of dissolving the illusion of separation that the ego clings to.
And that brings us to one of the most challenging teachings in the Sermon on the Mount.
Love your enemies.
You suggested this could be interpreted as recognizing our oneness.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, it's easy to love those who love us back, right?
But to love those who we perceive as enemies, those who have hurt us or wronged us in some way.
That requires a radical shift in perspective.
And I think that shift starts with recognizing that our enemies are not separate from us.
They are reflections of ourselves.
Aspects of the human experience that we might not like or understand, but that are nonetheless part of the whole.
So it's about recognizing the shared humanity that connects us all, even when it's difficult.
Exactly. And it's not about condoning harmful behavior or letting people walk all over us.
It's about choosing to see beyond the surface, to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every human being,
Yeah.
even those who have caused us pain.
It's about choosing love over fear, even when it's challenging.
And this whole conversation about interconnectedness reminds me of that passage about the eye and the lamp.
The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light.
You mentioned that we could connect this to the concept of consciousness.
Yes, I think it's a beautiful metaphor for how our consciousness shapes our perception of the world.
If our consciousness is clouded by negativity, fear, and judgment,
Then our world will appear dim and distorted.
but if we cultivate a clear, compassionate, and discerning consciousness,
Then our world will be illuminated with wisdom, understanding, and love.
it's like putting on a pair of glasses with a different prescription.
The world looks completely different, depending on the lens through which we view it.
Exactly. And so the Sermon on the Mount is, in many ways, about cultivating that healthy vision.
That expansive consciousness that allows us to see the world and ourselves more clearly,
It's about recognizing the power of our own minds to shape our reality.
and choosing to create a more empowering and fulfilling inner landscape.
And one of the keys to cultivating that inner landscape is reframing how we view our mistakes.
You suggested that the concept of sin could be interpreted as missing the mark.
Rather than something inherently bad or wrong.
Yes, I think that's a much more empowering and compassionate perspective.
Because when we see our mistakes as missing the mark, it takes the focus off of blame and shame.
And places it on growth and learning.
It allows us to approach life with a sense of curiosity and exploration.
Recognizing that we're all on a journey of becoming more aligned with our highest selves.
It's about embracing the process of learning and growing.
Recognizing that we're all works in progress.
Exactly. And it's about extending that same compassion and understanding to others.
Because when we let go of the need to judge, to label, to categorize people as good or bad,
We open ourselves up to a much richer and more fulfilling experience of human connection.
which brings us back to that idea of judging as making preconceived assumptions.
You mentioned that this creates separation and misunderstanding.
It does. Because when we judge others, we're essentially projecting our own insecurities, our own fears and limitations onto them,
We're creating narratives based on limited information,
filtered through our own biases and beliefs.
and that prevents us from truly seeing and appreciating the unique beauty and complexity of each individual
It's like we're looking at the world through a keyhole instead of opening the door.
and stepping into the fullness of experience.
Exactly. And so the Sermon on the Mount invites us to open that door.
To let go of our preconceived notions and to approach each other with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to learn and grow.
Wow, we've really gone deep on this one, huh?
Yeah, it is remarkable.
Well, it's
isn't it?
amazing how these teachings from the Sermon on the Mount
Something delivered thousands of years ago.
still feel so relevant to our modern lives.
It is, and I think that speaks to the enduring power of these principles. They tap into something fundamental about the human experience.
Something that transcends time and culture.
Absolutely. And it feels like we've just scratched the surface,
There's so much depth and wisdom in the Sermon on the Mount.
that we could probably spend a lifetime unpacking it all.
I agree, but even in this short, deep dive, we've managed to reframe some pretty foundational concepts.
Like how fire of hell might represent that feeling of being trapped in a cycle of negative thinking,
Yeah.
or how adultery in the heart could be seen as that inner dissonance we feel when our actions don't align with our values.
Right, and that idea of giving your shirt as a metaphor for detaching from material possessions.
That was a real game changer for me.
It really highlights how the Sermon on the Mount encourages us to look beyond the literal interpretation.
And explore the deeper, more symbolic meanings.
And speaking of symbolism, that whole passage about the eye being the lamp of the body.
That really struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful way to describe the power of cultivating a clear and compassionate consciousness.
It is, and it ties in so beautifully with the idea of your kingdom come, representing a state of higher consciousness.
It's about cultivating that inner kingdom of peace, wisdom, and interconnectedness.
And choosing to see the world through a lens of love and understanding.
Rather than fear and judgment.
Right. It's like we've been given a whole new set of tools for navigating life's challenges.
Precisely. And tools that are incredibly relevant in today's world.
Think about the concept of turning the other cheek.
In the age of social media and instant reactions,
Choosing non-reaction is a superpower.
it's about taking a pause, stepping back from the cycle of negativity.
And choosing a more constructive response.
Exactly. And what about the idea of loving your enemies?
In a world that's increasingly polarized.
That teaching feels more important than ever.
It's a call to transcend the us versus them mentality.
And recognize our shared humanity,
It's about recognizing that we are all interconnected.
even in our differences and disagreements.
Precisely. And it's not about condoning harmful behavior, but about approaching even those we disagree with from a place of compassion and understanding,
It's about choosing love over fear.
even when it's difficult.
Yeah.
And you know that concept of sin as missing the mark.
That's such a powerful reframe for personal growth.
It takes a focus off of blame and shame
It does.
and places it on learning and evolving.
It encourages us to see our mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities for growth.
And it reminds us that we are all on a journey of becoming more aligned with our highest selves,
And to embrace that journey with a sense of curiosity and compassion.
both for ourselves and for others.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the idea of judging as making preconceived assumptions.
When we judge others, we often project our own insecurities and limitations onto them.
It's a way of creating separation and reinforcing our own sense of separateness.
It's a defense mechanism, really.
A way of protecting our own egos.
It is. But the Sermon on the Mount invites us to let go of those defenses.
To open our hearts and minds to a more expansive and compassionate way of seeing the world.
It's about recognizing that we are all connected.
That we are all part of something larger than ourselves.
Precisely. And when we operate from that place of interconnectedness, we naturally move toward greater understanding, compassion, and love.
This has been such a rich and rewarding deep dive
I feel like we've uncovered some really valuable insights
into how the Sermon on the Mount
can be applied to our modern lives.
I agree. It's amazing how these ancient teachings can speak so directly to the challenges and opportunities we face today.
And it makes me wonder,
If sin is missing the mark,
what are some marks we might be missing in our modern lives?
that's a great question.
What are some of the ways?
We might be falling short of our highest potential.
And one I think we all need to ponder individually. Perhaps we're missing the mark when we prioritize external validation over inner peace,
Or when we allow fear and anxiety to dictate our choices.
or when we fail to extend compassion to those who are different from us,
It's about getting caught up in the hustle and bustle of modern life.
and losing sight of what truly matters.
Connection, compassion.
Then living a life that's aligned with our deepest values.
Exactly. And the beauty of the Sermon on the Mount is that it offers a roadmap for returning to that alignment, for cultivating a more fulfilling and meaningful existence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder.
what are some of the marks you might be missing in your own life?
What steps can you take to adjust your aim?
And create a more conscious
Compassionate and fulfilling experience for yourself.
than those around you.
And remember, the journey is the destination. Embrace the process of learning and growing, and trust that with each step you take toward greater awareness, you're creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond yourself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep into the mysteries of life.